The recycled air tasted like metal and regret tonight, same as every other night on Frontier Outpost Delta 7. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison ran his fingers through his hair and glanced at the chronometer embedded in his wrist display. 2,347 hours. 3 minutes past lights out, which meant he was officially off duty and could finally stop pretending that monitoring empty corridors for 18 months straight hadn't slowly pickled his brain. Jake's quarters were a masterpiece of military efficiency, which was a polite way of saying they'd managed to cram everything a human being needed to survive into a space roughly the size of a storage closet. His regulation cot sat against one wall, a small desk occupied most of the opposite corner, and a narrow locker held his few personal belongings. The room's single porthole showed nothing but the swirling clouds of Kepler 442b below, occasionally interrupted by the stark geometry of the orbital platform's support struts. He was reaching for his sleep shirt when the door chimed softly. Jake froze, one arm halfway out of his uniform jacket. Nobody visited after lights out unless someone was dying, something was exploding, or Corporal Chen had another brilliant theory about why the coffee maker was definitely an alien spy device. "Enter," he called, expecting to see Chen's conspiracy-addled face or maybe Commander Walsh with another delightful surprise assignment. Instead, a figure slipped through the doorway like smoke given form. Jake's brain took several seconds to process what he was seeing, mainly because what he was seeing shouldn't exist according to about 14 different regulations and at least 3 laws of physics. The girl, woman, standing in his quarters was unmistakably Etherian. Her skin held that subtle luminescence that their species possessed, a soft inner glow that made her seem lit from within. Dark hair fell past her shoulders in waves that seemed to move with their own subtle current. But it was the ears that gave her away completely, long and elegantly pointed. They twitched slightly as she took in the sparse surroundings of his room. Her large eyes, the color of deep ocean water, fixed on his with an expression that mixed determination with barely contained panic. "Can I sleep beside you tonight, human?" she asked in accented standard, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's mouth opened, closed, then opened again without producing any sound. His military training, which had prepared him for everything from alien invasion to equipment malfunction to the dreaded surprise inspection, had somehow failed to cover this particular scenario. The Advanced Combat Survival Manual had an entire chapter on what to do if captured by hostile aliens, but nothing about what to do when a non-hostile alien politely requested to share your bunk. Jake managed, then realized he was still standing there with one arm stuck in his jacket like some kind of demented scarecrow. He quickly pulled the garment back on, though he noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "You're not supposed to be here." She flinched at his words, and Jake immediately felt like he'd just kicked a puppy. A very tall, luminescent puppy with pointed ears who somehow spoke his language. "I know," she said, wrapping her arms around herself, "but I have nowhere else to go." Jake glanced at the door, half expecting alarms to start blaring and security teams to come storming in. The corridor remained quiet, bathed in the soft blue glow of night cycle lighting. He looked back at the girl, noting the way her shoulders trembled and how she kept darting glances toward the hallway as if expecting pursuit. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised by how gentle his own voice sounded. "Lyra." She pronounced it with a musical lilt that made the simple name sound like a song. "And you are Jake Morrison, Staff Sergeant, Service Number 7731 Delta Prime." Jake's eyebrows shot up. "How do you know that?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile ghosted across Lyra's features. "Your door plate and your name is on your uniform." She paused, tilting her head in a way that made her ears twitch. "Also, Tommy Chen talks about you constantly during his broadcasts." "His what now?" "He has been trying to contact my people for weeks. His transmission attempts are enthusiastic and loud. We hear him saying Jake this and Jake that and asking if we want a phone home like in your entertainment programs. Jake felt heat creep up his neck. Chen's been trying to make contact. That absolute. He caught himself before completing the curse, mainly because something about Lyra's presence made him want to mind his language. That's completely against protocol. Yes, your Commander Walsh seems quite frustrated with him. She uses many words I do not recognize, but her tone suggests they are not complimentary. Despite everything, the massive regulation violations, the potential court-martial, the fact that he was having a casual conversation with a member of an alien species in his quarters at midnight, Jake found himself fighting back a laugh. You've been listening to our communications. Lyra's glow dimmed slightly and she looked down at her hands. Not intentionally. We are sensitive to electronic signals. It is difficult to block them out completely. Jake studied her face, noting the exhaustion in her features and the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Whatever had driven her to seek him out, it wasn't some casual whim. Lyra, why are you really here? And why me? She was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if she'd changed her mind about talking. Then, so softly he had to strain to hear her. Because you were kind to the maintenance worker. What maintenance worker? 3 days ago. One of our people was repairing the atmospheric processors near Section C. He accidentally triggered an alarm, and you found him there. You could have reported him, but instead you helped him fix his mistake and sent him away safely. Jake remembered the incident. He'd been doing his rounds when he'd stumbled across a lone Etherian frantically working on what looked like a ventilation panel. The guy had clearly been terrified, stammering apologies in broken standard while his ears twitched like radar dishes. Jake had helped him finish the repair work and walked him back to the access port without logging the encounter. It had seemed like the decent thing to do. That was just. Jake shrugged. He wasn't hurting anything. No reason to make trouble. That maintenance worker is my brother, Lyra said quietly. He told me there was at least one human who might show mercy to a lost Etherian. The weight of her words settled over the small room like a blanket. Jake found himself really looking at her for the first time, not just seeing an alien, but seeing someone young and scared, and desperately hoping for kindness from a stranger. What kind of trouble are you in? He asked. Lyra's laugh held no humor. The worst kind, the kind where both sides want you gone. Jake's internal chronometer informed him that he'd been staring at the ceiling for approximately 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 32 seconds. Not that he was counting. The soft sound of Lyra's breathing from the spare cot had become oddly comforting, though he'd never admit that to anyone, especially not to himself. She'd curled up like a cat, knees drawn to her chest, one hand tucked under her cheek. Her ears twitched occasionally in what Jake assumed was dream sleep, and the faint luminescence of her skin cast gentle shadows on the wall. He'd offered her his regulation blanket, but she'd politely declined, explaining that Etherians ran warmer than humans. Good to know for future reference, assuming there was a future reference and not a court-martial followed by a lengthy prison sentence. The morning alarm chimed at 600 sharp, causing Jake to jolt upright and Lyra to practically levitate off her cot. Her ears swiveled toward the sound like organic radar dishes before she relaxed, one hand pressed to her chest. Your morning sounds are very aggressive, she observed, smoothing down her hair. Welcome to military life, Jake muttered, swinging his legs over the side of his bunk. Everything here is designed to be either efficient or intimidating. Sometimes both. The real challenge, Jake realized as he pulled on his uniform, was going to be explaining why he suddenly needed twice as much food from the mess hall. Etherians ate, presumably, though he hadn't thought to ask about dietary restrictions. Did they process human food? Were there allergic reactions to consider? His survival training had covered alien environments but not alien dinner guests. Stay here, he told Lyra, who was examining his small mirror with intense fascination. Don't touch anything that beeps, blinks, or looks important. Actually, don't touch anything at all. What if something touches me first? Jake paused in the doorway. What kind of something? I do not know, that is why I am asking. He decided that was a problem for future Jake to handle and headed for the mess hall, trying to look casual and definitely not like someone harboring an unauthorized alien in his quarters. The mess hall buzzed with its usual morning chaos. Jake grabbed his standard tray, reconstituted protein, vitamin paste, and something that claimed to be coffee but tasted like motor oil mixed with false hope. He lingered near the dispensers, trying to figure out how to obtain a second meal without arousing suspicion. Morrison, you eating for two now? Jake nearly dropped his tray. Corporal Tommy Chen appeared beside him, grinning with the manic enthusiasm of someone who'd consumed too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Tommy was small, wiry, and absolutely convinced that the universe was personally conspiring against him in creative ways. What? Jake managed. Second tray, man. Either you're bulking up for the combat trials or you've got a secret girlfriend stashed somewhere. Tommy wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. I bet it's Martinez from engineering. She's got that whole mysterious thing going. I'm just hungry, Jake said lamely, grabbing another tray and loading it with food. Tommy leaned closer, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper, but sounded more like a rusty hinge. Or maybe you finally made contact with our alien friends, and you're conducting unauthorized diplomatic relations through the universal language of sharing breakfast. Jake's blood turned to ice water. That's crazy talk, Chen. Is it though? Is it really? Tommy's eyes gleamed with the fervor of a true believer. Think about it. They've been watching us for months. They know our routines, our weaknesses. What better way to infiltrate our defenses than through the heart of a lonely soldier? You've been reading too many conspiracy theories. Or not enough. Wake up, Morrison. The signs are everywhere. Yesterday the coffee maker dispensed actual coffee instead of that brown liquid sadness we usually get. Coincidence? I think not. Jake edged away from Tommy, both trays balanced carefully in his hands. The coffee maker got a maintenance update, Chen. I saw the repair log. That's what they want you to think, Tommy called after him as Jake made his escape. But mark my words, something weird is going on around here, and I'm going to figure out what it is. Jake made it back to his quarters without further incident, though he caught Lieutenant Rodriguez giving him an odd look when she noticed the two trays. He'd have to come up with a better cover story, and soon. Lyra was exactly where he'd left her, though she'd somehow managed to make his small mirror reflect patterns of light that definitely weren't there before. She looked up as he entered, and the strange light patterns immediately faded. Food, Jake announced, setting one tray on his desk. I wasn't sure what you could eat, so I got a little of everything. Lyra approached the tray with scientific curiosity, her ears tilting forward as she examined each item. She picked up the fork, turned it over in her hands, then looked at Jake questioningly. It's for eating, he explained, demonstrating with his own utensil. You stab the food and put it in your mouth. Stab. Lyra's ears flattened slightly. This seems aggressive for a meal. Welcome to human cuisine. Everything's a battle, including breakfast. She tentatively tried the protein substitute, chewed thoughtfully, then made a face that suggested she was reconsidering her life choices. This tastes like sadness. Yeah, that's the reconstituted part. It's supposed to contain all essential nutrients, but nobody said anything about flavor. Jake took a bite of his own food and grimaced. Though yours might actually taste worse than usual, I think the dispenser's having an off day. Lyra set down her fork and touched the tray lightly with her fingertips. Immediately, the bland protein began to emit a faint, pleasant aroma. She took another bite and smiled. Better. Jake stared at her. What did you do? Enhance the molecular structure slightly. Your food was missing several flavor compounds that would make it more palatable. You can do that just by touching it. Cannot all humans manipulate matter at the molecular level? Lyra looked genuinely puzzled. How do you repair your technology? We use tools and training, and usually a lot of cursing. That seems inefficient. Tell me about it. Jake watched as she continued eating, processing this new information. An alien who could manipulate matter by touch was currently sitting in his quarters, eating magically improved military rations. This was either the best thing that had ever happened to him or the beginning of the end of his career. Possibly both. Lyra, about last night, he began carefully. You said both sides want you gone. What did you mean? Her luminescence dimmed slightly, and she set down her fork. My people are divided about your presence here. Some believe humans are a threat to be eliminated. Others think we should learn from you, work together. I believe in cooperation, but that makes me a traitor to the traditionalists and a liability to the progressives. And the humans. Your people fear what they do not understand. I am proof that we are more similar than different, which threatens the narrative that we are enemies to be conquered or obstacles to be removed. Jake nodded slowly. So you're caught in the middle. With nowhere to go but here, asking a stranger for sanctuary. She met his eyes. I know it is much to ask. Yeah, well, Jake said, surprised by his own words. Good thing I've always been terrible at following orders. 3 days had passed since Lyra's arrival, and Jake was developing an entirely new appreciation for the phrase, living on borrowed time. Their routine had evolved into something surprisingly comfortable. Jake would smuggle food from the mess hall while Lyra remained hidden. They'd share meals while she told him stories about Etherian culture. And he'd pretend to sleep while actually listening to her soft humming that somehow made the recycled air smell like spring rain. The morning of the 4th day brought Jake's first real crisis when the atmospheric recycling system in Section D decided to have what the engineering manual euphemistically called a cascade failure event. In practical terms, this meant that half the station was slowly suffocating, while emergency klaxons wailed like dying whales. Jake arrived at the engineering bay to find Chief Martinez elbow-deep in a control panel, cursing in 3 languages while sparks flew around her head like angry fireflies. Morrison, thank God, she called out, not looking up from her work. The primary atmospheric processor is throwing error codes I've never seen before. The backup systems are compensating, but we've got maybe 6 hours before things get really unpleasant. What do you need me to do? Stand there, look useful, and try not to electrocute yourself while I figure out why this piece of junk suddenly thinks it's a modern art installation instead of life support equipment. Jake watched Martinez work, noting the growing frustration in her movements. The diagnostic screens showed cascading red alerts that seemed to multiply faster than she could address them. After an hour of increasingly creative profanity, she sat back on her heels and wiped sweat from her forehead. I'm missing something, she muttered. The system's acting like it's fighting itself, but all the components check out individually. Jake found himself thinking about Lyra's casual manipulation of matter at the molecular level. What if it's not a mechanical problem? What if it's, I don't know, an interface issue? Interface with what? Maybe the problem isn't in any one component. Maybe it's in how they're communicating with each other. Jake surprised himself with the words, like if the translation protocols got corrupted somehow. Martinez stared at him. Morrison, that's either brilliant or completely insane. I'll be damned, Martinez said, leaning back in amazement. How did you know to look at the mesh networks? Jake shrugged, hoping he looked nonchalant rather than terrified. Lucky guess. That wasn't luck, Morrison. That was insight. The kind of thinking that usually comes from years of advanced training. She gave him a curious look. You've been taking engineering courses in your spare time. Something like that. When Jake returned to his quarters that evening, he found Lyra sitting cross-legged on his floor, surrounded by a collection of small electronic devices that definitely hadn't been there when he left. His personal tablet, his chronometer, his spare comm unit, and what looked like the room's environmental control panel were all glowing softly, connected by threads of light that seemed to flow between them. "Please tell me you didn't break into the wall," Jake said weakly. "I improved the efficiency of your room systems by 37%, Lyra replied without looking up. "Also, your tablet now has access to the full Galactic Information Network, instead of just your local databases." Jake stared at the impromptu light show. "That's probably several kinds of illegal." "Is it illegal to make things work better? On a military station, pretty much everything fun is illegal." Lyra's ears drooped slightly. "Should I change it back?" "No, just maybe warn me next time before you turn my quarters into a science experiment." Jake sat on his cot and rubbed his temples. "Speaking of science experiments, I may have accidentally used information you taught me to solve a major engineering problem today." "That is good. Cooperation leads to better solutions. Except now Chief Martinez thinks I'm some kind of technical genius, and she's probably going to start asking me to help with more complicated problems that I definitely can't solve without your help." Lyra looked up from her work, and Jake could see mischief dancing in her eyes. "Then we will have to make sure you do not disappoint her." "Lyra, no. Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." "I am thinking that your people have many problems that could be solved if they understood how systems truly connect to each other. And I'm thinking that if anyone finds out I'm getting alien technical assistance, they're going to assume I'm either a traitor or completely insane." "Cannot you be both?" Jake blinked. "Was that a joke? I am learning human humor from your entertainment broadcasts. Tommy Chen watches many programs about humans making poor decisions and finding them amusing." "Dear God, you've been watching Tommy's comedy shows. No wonder you're developing a twisted sense of humor. I particularly enjoyed the one where the humans repeatedly injure themselves while attempting to perform simple tasks. The laugh track suggests this is considered highly entertaining. That's slapstick comedy, and it's not supposed to be a how-to guide for real life." "Noted." Lyra stood up, and the glowing connections between the devices faded. "Jake, may I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do humans use the phrase break a leg to wish someone good fortune? It seems contradictory to your goals." Jake opened his mouth to explain, then stopped. "You know what? I honestly have no idea. That's just one of those things we say without really thinking about it. Your language is very confusing. Yesterday, Tommy Chen told someone to knock them dead before a performance evaluation, but I do not think he literally wanted them to commit murder." "No, that's just another expression. We say a lot of things we don't actually mean." "This explains much about human behavior," Lyra said solemnly. "You are a species that communicates primarily through contradictions and metaphors." "When you put it like that, it's amazing we ever get anything done." "Yes, it is remarkable that you achieved space travel at all." Jake was still trying to decide if that was another joke when his door chimed. He and Lyra both froze, staring at each other with the sort of panic usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. "Quick," Jake whispered, "the maintenance access panel behind my locker." Lyra moved with fluid grace, slipping into the narrow space just as Jake opened the door to find Commander Walsh standing in the corridor with a tablet in her hand, and an expression that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Sergeant Morrison," she said crisply, "I need to conduct a surprise inspection of all quarters. There have been some unusual energy readings reported in this section." Jake's heart tried to relocate itself somewhere in the vicinity of his throat. "Of course, Commander. Come right in." Commander Walsh's inspection had been thorough, professional, and mercifully brief. She'd scanned Jake's quarters with her energy detector, found nothing unusual, thanks to Lyra's apparent ability to mask her own biosignature, and departed with a curt nod. Jake had spent the following 10 minutes sitting on his cot, staring at the wall and contemplating the various ways his military career could end in spectacular fashion. That was before the real crisis hit. The emergency klaxons began wailing at 3:47 hours, jolting Jake from the first decent sleep he'd managed in days. His comm unit crackled to life with Commander Walsh's voice, tight with controlled tension. All senior staff report to the command center immediately. We have a situation. Jake threw on his uniform and was halfway to the door when he remembered Lyra. She was already awake, sitting up on her cot with her ears swiveled toward the source of the alarm. "What is happening?" she asked. "I don't know, but stay here. Don't leave this room no matter what you hear." The command center was chaos when Jake arrived. Officers clustered around displays showing tactical readouts while Commander Walsh stood at the center console, her face grim. "Gentlemen," she announced as the last stragglers filed in, "we have 3 Etherian vessels approaching the station. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding we surrender what they call the Corrupted One for immediate judgment." Jake's blood turned to ice water. Chief Martinez whistled low. "What's their ETA?" 40 minutes, maybe less. They're not responding to our diplomatic channels." Walsh's jaw tightened. "They seem to think we're harboring an Etherian fugitive." "Are we?" asked Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Not officially, no, but someone apparently thinks we are." Walsh's gaze swept the room. "I want options, people. What do we do if they decide to take their fugitive by force?" The discussion that followed was heated and largely pointless. The outpost's defensive capabilities were minimal at best, designed more for asteroid deflection than actual combat. Against 3 Etherian vessels, their chances ranged from slim to non-existent. Jake found himself thinking about Lyra, alone in his quarters, probably listening to the alarms and knowing they were coming for her. The thought made something twist painfully in his chest. "Commander," he heard himself saying, "what if we had someone who could communicate with them? Someone who could explain the situation?" "You mean an Etherian?" Walsh looked skeptical. "Where exactly would we find one of those, Sergeant?" Jake took a deep breath. "My quarters. Her name is Lyra, and she's been hiding there for the past 4 days." The command center fell silent, except for the hum of electronics and the distant wail of alarms. Jake could practically hear his career circling the drain. "You've been harboring an alien fugitive." Walsh's voice was dangerously quiet. "Yes, ma'am. She came to me asking for sanctuary. She's caught between factions of her own people, and both sides want her gone. And you thought this was information you could keep to yourself." "I thought it was the right thing to do." Commander Walsh stared at him for what felt like several geological ages. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. "Well, Sergeant, it looks like your unauthorized guest might be our only shot at avoiding a diplomatic incident. Go get her." Jake returned to his quarters to find Lyra sitting calmly on his cot, as if 3 warships weren't bearing down on the station with the express purpose of dragging her away. She looked up as he entered, and he saw resignation in her eyes. "They found me," she said simply. "Yeah, but you're not going anywhere unless you want to." Jake sat beside her on the narrow cot. "Commander Walsh wants to talk to you. She thinks you might be able to help us resolve this without anyone getting hurt." "You told them about me." "I had to. They were going to start shooting and innocent people would have died." Jake met her gaze. "I'm sorry. I know you trusted me to keep you safe." Lyra was quiet for a moment, then reached out and touched his hand lightly. "You are keeping me safe, by giving me a chance to speak instead of hiding while others fight my battles." The walk to the command center felt like a death march, but Lyra moved with quiet dignity, her head held high. When they entered, every conversation stopped. Jake had to admire his colleagues' professionalism. None of them started shooting or screaming, though Martinez did mutter something that sounded like, "I knew the coffee maker was acting weird." Commander Walsh stepped forward, and Jake was surprised to see curiosity rather than hostility in her expression. "You must be Lyra." "I am. And you are Commander Sarah Walsh, age 43, service record exemplary, known for fairness and tactical innovation." Lyra tilted her head. Your people speak of you with respect. How do you? Never mind. I'm told you might be able to help us communicate with those ships out there. I can try, but they will not listen to words alone. They believe I have been corrupted by human contact, that I represent a dangerous deviation from traditional Etherian values. And have you been corrupted? Walsh asked with a slight smile. Lyra considered this seriously. I have learned that humans are more complex than my people believe. You are capable of great kindness and surprising wisdom, even when it comes at personal cost. Her ears swiveled briefly toward Jake. This is perhaps a corruption worth having. The communication that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Lyra stood before the main display, her hands moving in complex patterns while she spoke in her own language, her voice taking on harmonics that seemed to resonate through the station's hull itself. The response from the approaching ships was immediate, angry, demanding, but no longer quite as hostile. "What are you telling them?" Walsh asked during a pause in the exchange. "That I have learned something important about cooperation. That their fears are based on incomplete information. That perhaps we should consider the possibility that humans and Etherians might have more to gain from partnership than from separation." "And are they buying it?" "Some are, others." Lyra's luminescence flickered. Others would prefer to eliminate the question entirely. The negotiation stretched on for hours, with Lyra serving as translator, mediator, and occasionally the subject of heated debate. Jake watched her handle increasingly difficult questions with patience and grace, never losing her composure even when the accusations became personal. Finally, as the station's chronometer ticked past dawn, an agreement emerged. A formal cultural exchange program would be established, with volunteers from both species living and working together under careful supervision. Lyra would be the first official Etherian participant, and Jake, at her specific request, would serve as her human counterpart and guide. "Congratulations, Sergeant," Commander Walsh said as the Etherian ships began their withdrawal. "You've just volunteered for the most important assignment of your career. Try not to start any interstellar incidents." "No promises, ma'am." Later, standing in the observation lounge and watching the first tentative groups of humans and Etherians meeting under the careful supervision of diplomatic protocols, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed in less than a week. He'd gone from a bored security guard to an inadvertent ambassador, and somehow it felt exactly right. "Regrets?" Lyra asked, joining him at the viewport. Other conversations were happening around them now, tentative, careful, but happening. "About what?" "About letting a strange alien into your room in the middle of the night." Jake considered this. 4 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether the coffee dispenser would work properly. Now he was helping to build the foundation for interspecies cooperation, and somehow his military career had survived the experience. "Only one," he said finally. "What is that?" "I should have offered you the good pillow from the start. Common courtesy when you have guests." Lyra's laugh was like music, and Jake realized that some risks were worth taking, even when you couldn't possibly imagine where they might lead.